Okay, here we go again. Chapter 6 deals with my recollections about my dad. Well, the chapter covered it quite well, but I have had some additional thoughts, and so let me share with you those thoughts. Uh, my dad was very frugal. We'll just put it that way, frugal. Let me give you two or three examples of his frugality. We'd take a bath on Saturday night, all of us. The girls would go first, and they'd do their thing and so forth, and we boys would be last. And the very last person to bathe, and we'd change I think the girls changed it every time. They couldn't handle it, but the boys, we all bathed in the same water. And so Tom or I would go, and then the other one would go. And then the last one was always my dad. And he couldn't handle, usually you put a tub of water where you get it up over, a foot high or something so you can have a little water. He barely covered the bottom of the tub. He wanted to conserve always water and soap and all that sort of thing. He barely got wet, but at any rate, so there's one idea. Then, and this is true, you won't even believe this, sometimes he would bathe Goober, which is our dachshund dog, and then he'd bathe in the same water. Old Goober, he'd have his Saturday bath as well on occasion, not every Saturday, of course, but Dad was pretty frugal. Let me give you another example. My dad loved, he worked hard, like I mentioned in the chapter. He was the hardest working man I've ever known. He didn't take as much time as I thought he should to have a little fun. He had some fun, but he was heavily into the work, which is a good thing. Always provided well for his family, but he missed out on having some fun during the course of his life. He did go skiing a time or two. However, he'd go with some of his friends, and Ray and Lynn Barnson and Nate and all those guys that he associated with, and they would have the latest in ski gear, with the bindings and the laytest skis that were out there with the boots and all that stuff. And my dad, he couldn't quite see it to buy all of that stuff, so he secured some used wooden skis about 4 inches wide. I think maybe they were even cross-country skis or something, but he'd go downhill skiing with those. And, the bindings came off too easy and all of that stuff, but he just couldn't spend the money to go get the latest equipment, so he went with less than great equipment even when he had some fun. When he would go camping, he had a sleeping bag that would come up to his belly button. It wasn't, all the rest of them had these mummy bags that would keep you warm at 120 below zero or something, and he had a kind of a goose down thing, and it was old and so forth. But again, he couldn't justify spending money on that new equipment, so he took what he had and froze to death most nights. But that's what he had, and that's what he used. So there's another example of his frugality. One more, and I think I mentioned this incident in a future chapter, but I'll repeat it here. He loved Smith and Edwards down there, Brigham City, about Brigham City. It's still there today. He loved that store. You'd buy, if you can't find it there, you didn't need it, because it had everything you ever wanted, particularly for the outdoors and, those kinds of camping and all that stuff. Well, he bought a rubber raft. It was on sale. It was old. It was used big time, but he bought it and, thought we'd go fishing in that rubber raft or, that sort of thing. So we did. We'd go fishing. And I remember one day Tom and I and he were fishing out in the Blackfoot Reservoir. By the way, the oars that we were using in this old rickety rubber raft were the skis that he used to downhill ski with, those 4-inch wide cross-country skis. That was our paddles. So we were paddling out into the middle of the Blackfoot Reservoir to fish, which we always had fun doing. And he was a real good fisherman. But when we got out there, it was a Saturday, as I recall, and he, for some reason, wanted to change positions in the raft. So he got up, took one step in the middle of that raft, and the raft gave way. It broke. He broke through the bottom of the raft and went down into the Blackfoot Reservoir. And I was sitting on the pontoon around the rubber raft. There's a pontoon around there that keeps it afloat. And so, there was water coming up into the raft, but there was not much chance of sinking, and so forth. But I looked down, and all I could see was my dad looking up at me with his glasses on. He had glasses on. He always wore glasses. And he was looking up, and I could see him several feet under the water looking up at me with his glasses on. He came up, obviously, to the surface, and Tom and I were giggling. It was pretty funny. Anyway, we dragged him back into the raft and got those ski oars and oared back into the shore and so forth before we capsized. But that was pretty funny. Like I say, he's pretty frugal guy. Now, when I go camping, I don't take the latest and greatest either. Every time I go camping or fishing with somebody, whether it be Ray or Gary Smith or Bob or Drew or even my sons, just a month and a half ago, we went to Lake Alice. They always chide me for the equipment that I use. Again, I get the sleeping bag that I have, and I didn't even have a sleeping bag up at Alice, so my boys had to provide that. I haven't purchased one since the equipment that I had got too tattered to even use. When we went up with Bishop Quigley and the gummy bear incident, for those of you who were there, we weren't very well prepared, didn't have any food, the gummy bears, and the tent that we took was a two-man tent, and there were at least 4 of us in there, and then we were big people, so I was hanging out the side or the front and with the sleeping bag up around about my waist and freezing and all that stuff. So what I'm telling you is this ill preparedness when I go camping or fishing, and everybody gets on me for that. I kind of come by that kind of naturally from my dad, I guess, and we'll just say that. Okay. Now, my dad had severe eczema. That's a skin disease and so forth, and it was caused by being allergic to various substances, various grasses and weeds, particularly in the fall. He would get it, and it would be severe. His eyes would be swollen shut, and he'd have sores all over his body, particularly his legs, when he was exposed to these grasses and weeds that he was allergic to. But he also loved to hunt, so invariably he would tie his pant legs, tight a string around his pant legs so that the weeds and grasses wouldn't get up into his pants and cause severe problems. But he still suffered from it severely, even with the precautions that he took. We'd go pheasant hunting in the fall, and he was a good shot, by the way. We went over to Preston and Weston out in that area and come home with lots of pheasants every time. We're up limit of pheasants. And but when he'd come home, that would be usually on a Saturday. The next day, he suffered severely with that eczema and his eyes swollen shut and all that stuff. He had that his whole life, never outgrew it. And so those of you who suffer with eczema, I suspect the gene pool came from my dad because he suffered with it his whole life. Speaking of hunting, he was a hunter. He loved to hunt. I think I remember this incident maybe in a future chapter as well, and if I'm repeating it, I apologize, but that's okay. I remember one day we decided, well, it was right at the tail end of deer season. It was right at the start of pheasant season. And to make matters even better, the University of Idaho Vandals, which is where Dad went to school, and he was a Vandal supporter. He ran track for them and so forth. He was a Vandal through and through. The Vandals were playing the Utah State Aggies on that same Saturday. So we planned a trip to go up over the immigration pass. We would have our deer rifles ready to go in case we saw a deer. And when we got over to across the other side, going through Preston and Weston, we'd get our shotguns out and go out and run a few hedgerows to scare up a few pheasants to see if we could be successful there. And then, of course, by about 1:30 or 2 in the afternoon, which is when the ball game started between the Vandals and the Aggies, we wanted to be in Logan to go to that ball game. Well, that was a great plan, except that Saturday, when we woke up, it was snowing heavily. And in Bear Lake, heavily means heavily. It was really getting after it. It was a blizzard. But undaunted, we hop in the truck and we got our deer rifles out and ready to go and went over Immigration Pass looking for deer, unsuccessfully on this day, by the way. They were probably either hunkered down because they couldn't stand to be out anywhere because of the tremendous snow that we were receiving. Went to hunt some pheasants. I think we did get a couple of pheasants. Scared some up and shot a couple of pheasants. And then about 1:30, 2 o'clock, when the game started, we were in Logan in the stands watching the Vandals and the Aggies play football. Well, the Vandals were pretty good at that time, but the Aggies were superb. They had maybe their best team ever. They had Merlin Olsen and Miller were the tackles on defense. Tommy Larscheid and defensive back with the name of Green, who played for the Dallas Cowboys. They were really good. However, it had been snowing on Friday night, all night Friday, Saturday morning. It snowed heavily throughout the game. You could hardly see the players out there. The grounds people had pushed the snow off of the field and pushed it in a big ring around the perimeter of the football field there in the stadium. Well, during the game, when the players would go over towards the sideline, if they got tackled, they'd go into that big old snowdrift, and you couldn't even see them over there till they fought their way out of the snowdrift and came back out and kept from suffocating and so forth. Well, during the game, like I say, we were in our hunting gear, which is fine. I had a hat on, I remember. And during the game, it had snowed. My head got heavier and heavier. And I was looking down, the bill of my cap like I'm doing here. And the reason was I had about 8 or 10 inches of snow accumulating on the top of my hat during the ball game. And so I didn't realize that. That's why I was looking down so much, because it was so heavy. But we were sitting in the stands, heavy snow, lots of snow on my hat. But it was a great memory that, by the way, not only my dad and I, my grandpa, Hans, and I and my dad did this little Saturday activity, so that was a lot of fun. All right, let's see here. My dad was active in community affairs. He was on the board of the Lions Club in Montpelier for many years. He served as the president of the Lions Club for, I don't know how many, 2, 3, 4 years, something like that. So he was very active in the Lions Club as he served the city of Montpelier in that regard. Let's see, what else do I need to tell you? Oh, he was the office manager at Central Farmers, which is up Georgetown Canyon. He was hired as the office manager at Central Farmers, which he served faithfully for several years. Then he also secured the same position at Monsanto in Soda Springs. He was the office manager there, and that's what precipitated us from moving from Montpelier to Soda Springs. Pardon me. Okay. And his job, he was so good at it. He was an accountant, and he was very, very good with his figures. He took to it very well, and he was one of the best, and that's why he was successful in his jobs, because he was the best at it, and that's why they wanted him to come to both of those positions and others that he secured. Okay, there are several other things, but let me move on here. Don't want to make it too long. Uh, I was visiting Vicky and her family on Christmas, the Christmas of 1975, as I recall. Yes, we were. It was our year to go to Vicky's house for Christmas. Well, during our stay there, and we were having a lot of fun. We got a call from my mom, and in that call, she said that due to a physical that my dad took, with his job at Monsanto, they had detected some possible problems with his colon, and needed to do some exploratory surgery, which they did, of course, and she told me that my dad had colon cancer. Well, I wish I would have never received that call. That was kind of a belly drop to realize that my dad now had colon cancer. So, at any rate, that was a call I'll never forget. And between December and just before Christmas, they went in and found that it was not curable. They just sewed him back up and sent him home so that he could be as comfortable as possible before he passed away. That was a hard year. So, but on September the 19th, 46 years ago yesterday, my dad passed away of colon cancer. He was 53 years of age, way, way, way too young, and we've missed him every day since. My brother Tom was on his mission in Holland, and he had served most of his mission. It was like he was a month early, but because of my dad's condition, they wanted him to come home and be able to be with his dad for a little bit before he passed away. So his mission president, he decided that would be a good thing. So I remember him coming home early from Holland so that he could be with Dad before he passed away. All right, now one last thing. Two last things, I guess. My dad said he was asked to speak in church. Weeks, 2, 3, 4 weeks maybe before he passed away. He was emaciated. Cancer had taken its toll. I think he was around 100 pounds or something, maybe 115 pounds. And he was 5 feet 11 inches tall, so he was really drawn. It was hard to watch him waste away like that. But he couldn't sit very long because of the pain he was in. It was extreme pain. But he sat out on the couch during the sacrament meeting, and when it came time for him to speak, he came back into the church there in Soda Springs and walked up to the podium and spoke briefly, but in a heartfelt way. And I remember that speech impacted me greatly. He said, I do not feel picked on as a result of this malady or this cancer that I have. If it's the Lord's will that we have to leave, then so be it. And he didn't feel angry. He didn't feel anything except love for the church and the Lord, and he expressed that in his testimony. We have that testimony on an audio tape, and I would commend it to any of you who have a chance to listen to it. It will impact you greatly, because he knew what was happening in a very short amount of time. He was getting ready to leave his family and his wife that he had enjoyed so much for all those years. And I think they were married, as I recall, for 32 years. But so he was taken way too young. But what an example my dad was for me. And one last thing. I think I mentioned this maybe, but I don't recall. But one last thing. I've had a lot of jobs in my life, 3 throughout most of my life, but here's the reason for it, and I haven't voiced this very often. In fact, only 2 or 3 times in my life. But when I was tasked with mowing the lawn, like I mentioned in another chapter, and picking the weeds and doing all those things, and around the house, I never did enjoy that very much. But when I delayed doing it, I remember Mom and Dad, coming home, and for whatever reason, they said, maybe you're just too lazy to do it. And I knew what lazy meant, and I didn't like that description of me. Didn't want to be labeled as lazy. And so from that day until this, I have tried to not be lazy. With 3 jobs in my life and so forth, I don't want my mom and dad to label me as lazy ever again, because that affected me. Dad didn't yell when he disciplined, but he would give you a look that said, "I'm disappointed in what you're doing here," and that was way more effective for me anyway than any other screaming and hollering or beating you or spanking you or any of that sort of thing. So, at any rate, he was effective in that regard as well. So, my dad, one of the great guys of all time. So we commend you to him. You'll enjoy him when you meet him. I'm looking forward to that day, but I certainly would like to stay here a longer period of time. I'll wait, but I'm looking forward to that reunion. Thanks very much.